Why did millions of soldiers enter the trenches? And why did so many never come back out? Trench warfare is iconic, but most people only know the image, not the reality. This wasn't just mud and barbed wire, it was rot, rats, gas, and madness. A system built to trap men and bleed them dry. In this video, we're digging into the real truth, the horrors no one told you about, the living hell beneath the surface. World War I started fast. Austria declared war on Serbia. Germany joined in. Russia mobilised. Within weeks, half of Europe was at war. At first, armies moved quickly. Cavalry charges, long marches, bold offensives. But that didn't last. They were still using 19th century tactics against 20th century weapons. Machine guns tore through waves of advancing troops. Artillery rained down with industrial force. Railroads moved men and supplies faster than ever. But no one could break through. The front lines froze, and with no room to manoeuvre, both sides did the same thing. They started digging, first shallow scrapes in the dirt, then deep fortified trenches stretching hundreds of miles. From the Swiss border to the North Sea, a line of death was carved into the continent, and they still thought the war would be over by Christmas. It wouldn't. It had just begun. The trenches weren't just holes in the ground. They were an entire system of survival and slaughter. At the front, you had the fire trench, closest to the enemy. That's where men stood, rifles ready, on a raised fire step, staring across no man's land. Behind that was the support trench, with supplies, ammo and backup troops. Then came the reserve trench, where wounded men were dragged, and replacements waited for their turn to suffer. All of it connected by narrow communication trenches, winding paths through mud and hell. The design? Brutal but smart. They were built in zigzags, so if a shell hit or enemies broke in, the blast or bullets couldn't rip through a whole line of men. The walls were stacked with sandbags, reinforced with wood and corrugated metal. Barbed wire lined the front, a cruel tangle meant to trap and slow down attackers. Below ground, men carved out dugouts, cramped bunkers to sleep, eat and hide from shellfire. But here's the truth. These trenches weren't designed for comfort. They weren't even designed for long-term human life. Just quick protection from bullets and bombs. No drainage, no sanitation, no real shelter. They were wet, rotting cages. And soldiers were trapped in them for weeks, even months. A man could live, fight and die, without ever leaving the trench. You didn't live in a trench, you rotted in it. The first thing that hit you was the smell. A mix of sewage, sweat, gunpowder, and death. Corpses often couldn't be buried. They were left in the walls, under the floorboards, or just lying nearby. Rats the size of cats fed on them. Then they turned on the living. Soldiers wrote about rats gnawing on their boots, even biting their faces as they slept. Then came the lice, crawling through uniforms, sucking blood, laying eggs in seams. They caused trench fever, a brutal illness with fevers, rashes, and relentless pain. Even when washed, the lice came back. You couldn't get clean. The mud was constant. But this wasn't normal mud. It was a thick, infected soup of soil, blood, feces, and chemicals. Boots stayed wet for days, skin softened, turned white, then black. Trench foot set in, a slow, agonising rot that could end with amputation. And if that didn't kill you, gangrene might. Here's the part no one talks about. At times, more soldiers died from disease and exposure than from enemy bullets. That's how deadly the trenches were. The environment itself was trying to kill you. And somehow in all this, you were expected to perform routine tasks, like cleaning your rifle, in the rain, in the mud, with rats crawling over you and your fingers half frozen. If your weapon jammed in a firefight, you'd die. So you cleaned it, over and over, in hell. Bullets killed, but it was the artillery that slaughtered. Shells rained down day and night, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. You didn't see it coming. You just heard the whistle. Then everything went black. Artillery caused nearly 70% of all battlefield deaths in World War I. And even if it didn't kill you, it buried you alive. Collapsed trenches, shattered bones, shell shock, what we now call PTSD, came from men being bombed into madness. Then came the machine gun. A single crew with a Maxim or MG-08 could mow down hundreds. That's why charges across no man's land were almost always suicidal. Step out of the trench, and you were already dead. But the worst was yet to come. In 1915, at Ypres, the Germans released something new: chlorine gas, a slow, choking fog that burned the lungs and eyes. Men clawed at their throats, coughed up blood, died gasping for air. It was followed by phosgene and mustard gas, which burned skin and blinded soldiers for life. Gas masks were rushed into production, but they were clumsy, late and often failed. Sometimes the gas would soak into your uniform. You'd keep breathing it in for days. There was no safe weapon. Everything, bullets, bombs, gas, mud, was designed to maim, disfigure and break. And it worked. They called it going over the top. One whistle, that's all it took. You climbed the ladder, boots slipping in mud, heart hammering in your chest. Then you ran into no man's land. It wasn't land, it was a meat grinder. The ground between trenches was churned up mud, shattered trees and bloated corpses, barbed wire stretched in every direction. Razor sharp, waist high, and impossible to cross under fire. And from the enemy line, machine guns opened up, sweeping the field with bullets like a scythe. Every few yards, another man dropped, shot, blown apart, drowning in mud. At the Battle of the Somme, 1916, British troops were ordered to walk forward in lines. On the first day alone, they suffered 60,000 casualties. One day, all for a few hundred yards of broken earth. Verdun became a symbol of industrialised slaughter. 300,000 men killed, with little change to the front lines. Then there was Passchendaele. It rained for weeks. The mud was so deep it could swallow horses and men whole. Soldiers drowned, literally, before reaching enemy fire. Every attack was supposed to break the line. None did. Men died by the thousands for ground you could cross in 5 minutes. If you lived that long, not every wound was visible. Some didn't bleed. They shattered the mind. They called it shell shock. A new kind of injury no one really understood. Men would break down without warning. They'd tremble uncontrollably, go blind, lose the ability to speak. Some screamed for hours. Others just stared, frozen, silent, unreachable. But back then, this wasn't seen as trauma. It was seen as weakness, cowardice. Many officers thought these men were faking. Some were court-martialed. A few were even executed for simply breaking under the weight of war. One British soldier wrote, "I see their faces in the dark, eyes wide, mouths moving, but no words come out." One of them clawed at the trench wall for hours. He didn't stop until his fingernails came off. Shell shock wasn't rare, it was everywhere. Because in the trenches, the human mind had no place to hide. The trenches weren't just a failure of tactics, no. They were a failure of leadership. Generals sat miles behind the front, poring over maps, issuing orders. Most had no idea what trench life was really like. No idea what it meant to charge across no man's land under machine gun fire. And yet they kept ordering the same attacks, over and over, straight into barbed wire, straight into artillery, straight into death. British General Douglas Haig believed in wearing the enemy down. He called it a war of attrition. The idea? If you kill enough of the enemy, eventually they'll run out of men, even if it means losing hundreds of thousands of your own. But the enemy wasn't running out. Neither side was, because no one changed their thinking. The old tactics, amassed infantry, set-piece charges, no longer worked. But the commanders refused to adapt, and the men in the trenches paid the price. Even in hell, humanity survived. In the worst conditions imaginable, soldiers still found ways to care for each other. They shared everything: food, water, cigarettes, even dry socks. When a man was wounded, others risked their lives to drag him back. Sometimes they didn't make it back themselves. In December 1914, something unthinkable happened. The Christmas truce. Germans and British climbed out of their trenches, not to fight, but to talk. They shook hands, swapped rations, lit cigarettes. Some even played football in no man's land. It didn't last. But for one moment the war paused when the soldiers remembered they were human. That spirit, quiet, stubborn, and unbreakable, is what got them through the mud, the blood, and the madness. When the guns finally fell silent in 1918, the war was over, but the scars never healed. An entire generation was lost. Millions dead. Millions more broken in body and mind. Whole towns emptied of their sons. Survivors came home, but they never truly left the trenches. They carried the trauma with them, in nightmares, in silence, in the way they never spoke of what they'd seen. The war redrew borders, toppled empires, and sowed the seeds for an even greater conflict to come. But its deepest impact was personal, inside the heads and hearts of those who lived through it. Trench warfare wasn't just a military tactic. It was a factory of death, one that chewed up men, hope and humanity, and left only ghosts behind.